I remember how bright the lights in that borrowed auditorium felt, sharp as arrows. They pointed down as if exposing my every flaw, every tremor of uncertainty, while the jury sat unmoving in a row, their hands folded. Their faces stone, the crowd behind them was a blur, a mess of mothers, fathers, cousins, and strangers from our slender Tokyo neighborhood squeezed into folding chairs. My manuscript trembled in my hands. Pages creased and thumbed thin from weeks of desperate edits, passages scratched out and inserted in margins in my tiny, scribbling script. I tried to remind myself how I'd felt writing those lines, heartbeat racing, mind alight, moments that had felt almost holy, and measured that memory against the present, where my throat felt too narrow to push out the words. The teacher, Ogawa-sensei, nodded from the first row, her lips pursed tightly. "Begin, Sato-kun," she said, barely louder than a whisper. Suddenly I was 8 years old again, standing before an audience of adults judging my every word. I began to read. My voice faltered on the opening sentence. Someone coughed in the back of the room. My mother's anxious smile, her lips painted too red, froze and faded a little. I could see my older brother, arms crossed, slumped in his chair, already wearing the mask of impatience I knew so well. Outside, behind the thin glass windows, the city's lights flashed in distant patterns, traffic rolling by, oblivious to the silence bleeding through the tense little auditorium. A line stuck in my mind, refusing to come. My tongue wouldn't move. Silence grew, hunger and pain at its core. I blinked at the page, but the words turned to blurs. Someone shifted noisily in their seat. "Sorry," I whispered. Tears threatened, salted the corners of my vision. I looked up. The jury's faces revealed nothing but tired expectation. A bead of sweat ran into my collar. From the back, somebody, a cousin, perhaps, snorted a short, dismissive gasp. "Get on with it, Satoru," called out a voice, perhaps thinking it was whisper-soft, but it cut straight through the room. My father's eyes closed for a second, as if he could block out the sound. I ran then, not grand and tragic, but awkward, bumping my pages down onto the polished stage. Sliding doors rattled as I rushed out into the corridor, then all the way out of the tiny community center into the white-blue light of the Tokyo night. I pressed my palms onto the cold concrete, trying not to sob. I counted breaths and stared at the traffic, wishing desperately that I could shrink small enough to disappear amidst it. I was 16 and the shame hurt almost physically, coiling in my gut. Inside, my performance was over. Someone would gather my crumpled manuscript, left behind without so much as a finish. That humiliation would filter through our neighborhood block in hours, tangled with older stories of my strangeness, how I'd stay up late, lights on, scrawling stories in notebooks while others watched baseball or studied for cram school. Satoru the dreamer always somewhere else. Back at home in our cramped apartment, my mother simmered with embarrassment. "You're too sensitive," she snapped, pressing rapidly at her phone as if texting would erase the memory of tonight's failure. My father, usually silent, just lowered his face and busied himself straightening shoes by the jenkin. When my brother came back from buying sweet buns at the corner, he tossed one onto my desk with a muted, "Eat something." Even that small act felt like pity. But the worst came the next morning when I tried to slip quietly out of our building for school, and the third-floor neighbor, Yamada-san, wrinkled and sharp as vinegar, leaned out from her door. "So, little novelist, how will you support your mother when you cannot even speak your own words?" she called, chuckling. Her dog yapped at my ankles. I tried to squeeze past, eyes cast down. "I'll figure something out," I muttered, but the words withered between us. She tutted and the door clicked shut. At school, my classmates had already heard. "Where's the next great Japanese author?" said Takashi, smirking, and the others snickered behind their hands. I forced my way through that day, the next, and each one after, finding my solace only at the back corner of the public library, pen flicking through my battered notebooks. The stories came softer now, but they did not stop. Years moved. I nursed that humiliation, feeding it with quiet labor while the world's noise raged outside. I worked odd jobs, clerked at a noisy 24-hour convenience store, served coffee to chain-smoking office workers, sometimes washed sheets at a love hotel where mothers never wanted their children to end up. I went to university but studied distractedly, unable to shake the sense that I was just stalling for time. My brother Kaoru landed a job as an engineer. My parents beamed at him in family photographs, pride glowing warm and easy. I tried to celebrate for him, but a part of me wondered if he too would always see me as a lost cause. Still, I kept writing. Midnight morning, whenever there was a gap between shifts. Stories about lost children in sprawling cities, about hopeful strays and exhausted mothers, about people who ran from shame and tried to find their way back. No one wanted these stories, not the publishers who sent steady streams of rejection slips, each with a polite apology, nor the friends who encouraged me to try something more realistic. The pile of manuscripts grew, pages stacked in a disorderly mountain under my bed, each one a secret the city would choke out of me if it could. In those years, Tokyo always seemed to pulse just beyond my reach, neon-lit, busy, full of movement and promise. Sometimes I'd walk through Shibuya Crossing late at night, blending into the crowds, the only time I felt anonymous, free. I'd stop beside the Hachiko statue, watching couples and tourists filter by, and I'd whisper plots to myself, hoping the city would carry them away. There were moments I almost gave up. After my 20th rejection letter, I knelt in my tiny kitchen and tried, truly tried, to imagine what it would be to let this dream die. It felt like smothering a part of me that had always pushed onward, even through scorn. I thought of the laughter, the cheap jokes, the pity I saw in my parents' faces. Maybe they were right. Maybe the story of Satoru, the failed novelist, was already written, but some stubbornness, whether pride or hope, kept me going. On my 27th birthday, after a graveyard shift, I mailed the newest manuscript, titled Hikari wo Matu, Clad in Light, to a small literary magazine in Ginza. I forgot about it, sure it would be lost to another kind rejection. A month passed, then two, then miraculously an email with the header, "We'd like to publish your story." That winter, for the first time, a check came with my name on it, a thin envelope but heavy as gold. Holding it, I sat on my bed and let myself weep, not because I had succeeded, but because I had survived long enough to prove the world wrong, if only for a little while. The months that followed were strange and beautiful. The story, printed and bound, was read and quietly passed around literary circles. Critics called it achingly honest and unusually grounded. A larger publisher reached out, asking if I had a novel. I sent them the best of my manuscripts, the one I had nearly trashed after my lowest point. Publication, bookstores displaying my name, even if in small stacks buried behind cookbooks. Friends from university texted, some sheepish, others exuberant, radio interviews, an unexpected sense of momentum, of credibility. The city seemed to open piece by piece. Each little victory felt both too small and impossibly huge, but back home the silence remained. My parents never spoke of the books. Neither did Kaoru, busy with his new family and tidy apartment in Chiba. Word drifted back to our neighborhood, but more as rumor than celebration. Satoru's published, someone would say, but the words never landed with pride, more with a startled confusion, as if this could not possibly matter. It was only when a National Literary Prize longlisted my novel that things began to shift. My publisher invited me to an official event, press, writers, influential readers. And as if fate had been waiting for its own cruelty, it was to be held at none other than the community center in our neighborhood, the very place where I had failed so publicly years ago. I did not want to go. I feared the ghosts inside those walls, the echo of laughter, the faces, the crushing shame, but my editor was firm. "This kind of homecoming is what sells books," he said, not unkindly. The night arrived. The city was soft in late spring, sakura petals still falling in breezy drifts over the sidewalks as I made my way from the station. I passed the ramen shop where I had worked as a dishwasher, now shuttered and replaced by some new cafe. At the edge of our block, the community center rose bland and beige, just as I had left it, battered doors, a line of plastic slippers inside. A banner was strung over the main entrance. Local author Satoru Aoki, Literary Prize nominee. My name, bold and mispronounced by those who did not know me. I wanted to smile, but my nerves thudded in my chest. Inside, a shallow stage had been set up, no doubt on the very floor where I had scattered my pages years before. Chairs arranged in tight rows. The same burnt coffee scent in the air, aged with time. The audience filtered in. Neighbors I barely recognized, all of them older, children curious. A clutch of reporters and a couple of junior editors hovered awkwardly beside a stack of my books, real, glossy things with my name gleaming across their spines. Then quietly, almost uncertainly, my parents entered. My mother wore a new pink jacket and a stiff, nervous smile. My father in his best suit, hands too big and too rough for his pressed pants. Kaoru slipped in behind them, his own son in tow. Even Yamada-san, the cruel neighbor, took a seat in the second row, lips pursed, peering suspiciously at the pile of books. The host introduced me. A son of our very own district, now a voice shaping the literary future of Japan. There was polite applause. I stepped to the microphone, heart pounding, every scar from that night years ago awake and alive in my memory. The first row gazed up at me, some doubtful, some hopeful, some waiting for me to stumble. I held a new copy of my novel. I looked down at its weight, the texture of embossed letters under my fingers. I began to read. At first my voice wobbled, old habits, old wounds, but then something steadied inside me. The story I read was not about triumph but about loss, about a lonely boy in a glittering city, desperate to write himself out of invisibility. As I read, the room held quiet, no coughs, no laughter, just the scrape of a folding chair as someone leaned in. When I finished, there was a moment's silence, then applause, quiet at first, then insistent, swelling. My mother was crying. My father, too proud to show tears, wiped silently at his glasses. Yamada-san nodded, very small, as if admitting to herself that some mistake had now been righted. Reporters snapped pictures. My brother rose, walked to the stage and hugged me hard, murmuring, "I'm sorry I doubted you, I'm really proud." For a moment the air was thick with all that had passed, with everything that could never be said. Afterward, in a rare pause, Yamada-san approached, eyes brighter than I remembered. "You wrote those pages from pain," she said. There was no mockery. She laid a pale hand on my sleeve. "That is something to be proud of." Neighbors lined up for signatures, including some who had once mocked, some who had said I was chasing clouds. They held my books out to me, pen ready. I signed. For each I offered a bow, not from shame but from gratitude. There was a party afterward, light and crowded, laughter spilling from the old walls. My mother clung to me, proud and teary, retelling the story of the little novelist who made it after all to anyone who would listen. We went home late. The city was quiet, buildings looming over narrow streets where I had first dared to dream. I waited at the entrance to our apartment, where the weeds tangled with old bicycles. Kaoru caught me before I went in. "Did you ever really believe?" he asked. His voice was half wonder, half apology. "I think I had to," I said. Inside, I laid the signed copies of my book on our kitchen table for my parents. My father picked one up, finger tracing the cover, and smiled, a shy, complicated thing. "Your words will go far, Satoru," he said. That night I lay awake, window open, listening to the city's hush. I looked up at the ceilings cracked with age, thought of how far I'd traveled and how, in the end, the roads always led me home. I knew the years of struggle would not vanish, the wounds would remain. But now, when I passed through our neighborhood, I was someone who had faced rejection, swallowed it, made something lasting from pain. And in that old, battered community center, where I had once run from the world, I had read until silence was replaced by applause. I was not cured by success, I was changed by the journey. Dignity, not pride, was what I carried forward, the long, slow unfurling of a self that insisted, quietly, persistently, on believing old dreams could still be made new.